Why is some cleaning lady wandering around the executive wing? Dr. Gregory Lawson muttered under his breath as Samantha Phoenix Wells pushed her maintenance cart down the pristine hallway of Cedar Ridge Medical Center, her worn scrubs hanging. Loose on her lean frame, a faded military-style backpack slung over her shoulder. Security should keep the janitorial staff confined to the lower floors during board meetings. Nurse Melissa Turner whispered to her colleague, adjusting her designer stethoscope with obvious disdain. Little did they know the woman they were. Dismissing as just another janitor was a decorated fighter pilot whose split-second decisions had once saved an entire squadron from enemy fire, and tonight, those same instincts would be the only thing standing between the hospital and an unthinkable catastrophe. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Samantha methodically worked her way through the third-floor corridors of Cedar Ridge Medical Center. It was 11:30 p.m., and the hospital had settled into its nocturnal rhythm, emergency rooms buzzing with activity while the administrative wings grew quiet and still. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound against the polished linoleum as she emptied trash bins and wiped down surfaces with practiced efficiency. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what her uniform suggested, a night shift janitor going about her routine duties. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face showed the weathered look of someone who had seen more than her share of hardship. The name tag clipped to her chest read simply Sam W. Maintenance, giving no hint of the extraordinary life that had led her to these quiet hospital halls. Dr. Lawson emerged from conference room 3A, still grumbling about budget cuts and staffing issues to his colleague Dr. William Cross. Both men were impeccably dressed in tailored suits, having just concluded a late-night board meeting about the hospital's new security protocols. As they passed Samantha, Dr. Lawson's voice carried clearly down the hallway. The administration keeps hiring more of these minimum-wage workers instead of investing in proper medical equipment, he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Look at this. One probably didn't even finish high school, and we're trusting her with access to sensitive areas. Dr. Cross chuckled, adjusting his expensive watch. At least they work nights when the important people aren't around. Can you imagine having to navigate around cleaning staff during actual medical procedures? Samantha continued her work without reaction, though her trained eyes automatically cataloged the doctor's positions, their body language, and the security weaknesses she noticed in their casual conversation. Old habits died hard, and even after 3 years of civilian life, her mind still operated with the tactical awareness that had kept her alive through countless combat missions over hostile territory. Nurse Turner appeared around the corner, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her tablet as she updated patient charts. She spotted Samantha refilling a soap dispenser and rolled her eyes dramatically. "Excuse me," Turner said in a tone dripping with condescension. "Could you please finish that later? We have VIP patients on this floor, and the sound of your cart is ... disruptive." Samantha looked up briefly, meeting Turner's gaze with calm, steady eyes. "I'll be finished in just a few minutes, ma'am," she replied quietly, her voice carrying a subtle authority that Turner completely missed. "Well, make sure you are," Turner snapped. "Some of us have real responsibilities here. Lives depend on what we do, not just ... this." She gestured dismissively at Samantha's cleaning supplies before clicking away on her high heels. What Turner couldn't have known was that Samantha had spent 6 years making life-and-death decisions at 30,000 feet, flying close air support missions that had saved hundreds of ground troops from enemy fire. The woman she'd just lectured about real responsibilities had once single-handedly disabled an entire enemy convoy while under heavy anti-aircraft fire, earning her the Distinguished Flying Cross and the respect of every pilot in her squadron. Security Chief Frank Hudson rounded the corner, his bulky frame filling out his uniform as he conducted his nightly rounds. He spotted Samantha and immediately frowned, checking his watch with exaggerated concern. "You're running behind schedule," he said gruffly. "The third floor should have been finished an hour ago. We can't have maintenance staff wandering around all night. It makes the place look unprofessional." Samantha straightened up, instinctively falling into a more military posture before catching herself and returning to her civilian slouch. "I apologize, sir. There was a spill in the children's wing that needed immediate attention." Hudson's frown deepened. "That's not your department. Next time, call the appropriate team and stick to your assigned areas. We have protocols for a reason." "Understood," Samantha replied, though her sharp eyes had already noticed several security protocols that Hudson himself was violating: unlocked access panels, passwords written on sticky notes, and emergency exits that weren't properly monitored. As Hudson walked away, muttering about undisciplined staff, he had no idea that the woman he'd just scolded had once been responsible for coordinating airstrikes with ground forces, managing split-second timing that meant the difference between mission success and friendly fire casualties. Dr. Nicole Bryant emerged from the elevator, looking exhausted after a 12-hour shift in the emergency room. She barely glanced at Samantha as she passed, but her phone conversation carried clearly through the quiet hallway. "I don't know why they can't hire better cleaning staff," she said into her phone. "Half of them probably can't even read the warning labels on the chemicals they're using. It's honestly a liability having people like that wandering around a medical facility." Samantha's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had once read complex tactical manuals in 3 different languages, mastered advanced aircraft systems that took most pilots years to understand, and graduated top of her class from one of the most demanding military training programs in the world. But here, pushing a mop bucket down a hospital corridor, she was invisible, dismissed as uneducated and incompetent by people who had never faced a fraction of the challenges she'd overcome. Hospital. Administrator Joan Mitchell appeared at the end of the hallway, clipboard in hand as she conducted her own inspection. Her expensive business suit and perfectly styled hair marked her as someone accustomed to authority and respect. When she spotted Samantha, her expression immediately shifted to one of barely concealed irritation. "I thought the night shift was supposed to be more discreet," Mitchell said to the nurse accompanying her. "Board members have been complaining about maintenance disruptions during their meetings. Perhaps we need to reconsider our hiring standards." The nurse nodded eagerly. "Absolutely, Mrs. Mitchell. Some of these people just don't understand the importance of maintaining a professional atmosphere in a medical environment." Mitchell approached Samantha directly, her voice taking on the patronizing tone typically reserved for addressing children or pets. "Now I need you to understand something very important," she began slowly, as if speaking to someone with limited comprehension. "This is a hospital where very serious, very important work happens. We need you to be extra quiet and stay out of the way when important people are conducting business. Can you do that for us?" Samantha met Mitchell's gaze with the same steady composure she'd once used when receiving mission briefings from commanding officers. "Yes, ma'am. I understand the importance of this facility." "Good," Mitchell said with a satisfied smile, completely missing the deeper meaning in Samantha's words. "I'm glad we could have this little chat." As Mitchell and her entourage disappeared around the corner, Samantha returned to her work with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to pre-flight checks and weapon systems diagnostics. Every movement was purposeful, every action calculated, habits ingrained through years of military training where attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. What none of these people realized was that Samantha's current job was a choice, not a limitation. She was working nights to support her younger sister through medical school, while earning her own degree in aerospace engineering on the GI Bill. The woman they saw as beneath their notice was building a future, just as she had once built a distinguished military career that had taken her from a small farming town to the cockpit of some of the most advanced aircraft ever created. But tonight, as she quietly went about her duties in the sterile halls of Cedar Ridge Medical Center, Samantha Phoenix Wells had no idea that her past and present were about to collide in ways that would change everything, and that the same people now, dismissing her as just a janitor, would soon be depending on her to save their lives. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing orderly Luis Rodriguez and nurse Tracy Coleman engaged in animated conversation. They stepped out onto the third floor, their voices echoing off the polished walls as they discussed weekend plans and hospital gossip. When they spotted Samantha methodically organizing her cleaning cart, their conversation took a predictable turn. "Look at her," Coleman whispered loudly enough for Samantha to hear. "I bet she doesn't even know what half the equipment in this place does. They really should require some kind of basic education before letting people work in a medical facility." Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "My cousin works at Metro General, and they at least make their maintenance staff take a basic first aid course. Here, they just hire anyone who can push a mop around." Samantha continued arranging her supplies with military precision, each bottle and tool placed in its designated position. Her movements were economical and purposeful, a habit developed during years of aircraft maintenance, where every tool had its place and disorder could lead to mechanical failure at critical moments. But to Coleman and Rodriguez, she simply appeared to be an unskilled worker going through mindless motions. "Excuse me," Coleman called out in a tone she might use with a particularly slow child. "When you're done with whatever that is, the patient rooms need attention. Try not to disturb anyone who's sleeping, okay?" "Of course," Samantha replied quietly, her voice carrying no trace of the authority she'd once wielded when coordinating with air traffic control during complex combat. Missions. As the pair continued down the hallway, Rodriguez's voice carried back clearly. "I heard they're hiring more night shift cleaners because turnover is so high. Apparently, people like that can't handle the responsibility of working around actual medical professionals." Dr. Cross reappeared from his office, juggling a coffee cup and a stack of patient files. He nearly collided with Samantha as she moved her cart out of his path, causing him to spill several drops of coffee on his pristine white coat. "Seriously?" he snapped, glaring at Samantha as if she had deliberately sabotaged him. "This is exactly why maintenance staff shouldn't be working in medical areas during active hours. You people have no spatial awareness." Samantha's trained reflexes honed through countless hours of formation, flying where split-second adjustments prevented mid-air collisions, had actually moved her cart with precise timing to minimize the disruption. But Dr. Cross saw only what he expected to see, an clumsy janitor who couldn't navigate around her betters. "I apologize, Doctor," Samantha said, immediately producing the clean cloth from her cart. "Let me help you with that." "Don't touch it," Cross said sharply, backing away as if she carried some contagious disease. "I'll handle it myself. Just ... Try to stay out of the way of people doing important work." He stormed off, muttering about inappropriate staffing decisions and declining professional standards. What he couldn't have known was that the woman he'd just berated had once performed emergency landing procedures on a damaged aircraft while under enemy fire, demonstrating the kind of spatial awareness and precision that had saved not only her own life but the lives of 3 other crew members. Maintenance Supervisor Pete Jackson emerged from the supply room, checking items off a clipboard with methodical efficiency. He spotted Samantha and approached with the weary expression of someone dealing with a familiar problem. "Wells," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I've been getting complaints about your pace again. The medical staff expects these floors to be cleaned faster, with less visibility. They don't want to see maintenance workers during their shifts." Samantha straightened slightly, her posture unconsciously shifting toward the military bearing. that had once commanded respect from fighter pilots and ground crews alike. "I understand, sir. I've been thorough with the cleaning to ensure proper sanitation standards." Jackson waved dismissively. "Thorough is fine, but invisible is better. These doctors and nurses think they're running some kind of elite operation. Here, and seeing janitors reminds them that not everyone went to fancy schools." He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, half these people couldn't handle real work if their lives depended on it. But they sign our paychecks, so we play along." What Jackson didn't realize was that Samantha had graduated from the Air Force Academy, one of the most competitive educational institutions in the country, before completing flight training that had a 90% washout rate. The woman he was patronizing about fancy schools had earned advanced degrees in aeronautical engineering and tactical aviation while simultaneously mastering combat systems that required the kind of intellectual rigor most civilians never encountered. "I'll adjust my schedule to minimize visibility," Samantha replied diplomatically. "Good. And remember, these people think they're saving lives up here. Let them feel important." Jackson walked away, shaking his head at what he perceived as the natural order of hospital hierarchy. Detective Alex Murphy appeared at the elevator bank, his rumpled suit and tired expression suggesting he was responding to some routine late-night incident. He glanced at Samantha with the casual indifference of someone accustomed to seeing invisible service workers during his rounds. "Evening," he said briefly, more out of habit than genuine acknowledgement. His attention was already focused on finding the right office for whatever minor matter had brought him to the hospital. Dr. Bryant reappeared from the break room, still engaged in her phone conversation. This time, she was discussing hospital security policies with apparent frustration. "The problem is that we have too many minimum wage workers with access to sensitive areas," she was saying as she passed Samantha again. "Background checks are expensive, but when you're hiring people who probably can't even read medical terminology, you're taking risks that go beyond just cleaning quality." Samantha's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Her security clearance had once been classified at levels that would have impressed even Dr. Bryant, and she had undergone background investigations so thorough that investigators had interviewed her high school teachers and childhood neighbors. The woman Dr. Bryant assumed couldn't read medical terminology had once studied advanced aviation medicine and human factors engineering as part of her pilot training. Security Chief Hudson reappeared on his rounds, this time accompanied by a younger officer who was clearly new to the hospital. Hudson was using Samantha as an example in what appeared to be an impromptu training session. "See, this is what I mean about maintaining professional boundaries," Hudson was saying to his trainee. "Maintenance staff need to understand that they're support personnel. They're not part of the medical team, and they shouldn't act like they have opinions about hospital operations." The younger officer nodded seriously, studying Samantha as if she were an exhibit in a manual about proper workplace hierarchy. Neither man could have imagined that the woman they were discussing as support personnel had once been responsible for close air support missions where ground troops' lives depended entirely on her tactical decisions and split-second judgment. Hospital Administrator Mitchell returned to the floor, this time leading a small group of what appeared to be visiting executives or potential donors. She was clearly showing off the facility's premium features and professional atmosphere. "We maintain very high standards for all staff," Mitchell was explaining to her guests. "Of course, certain positions require different levels of sophistication. But even our maintenance workers are expected to understand their role in supporting our medical mission." As the group passed Samantha, Mitchell gestured vaguely in her direction. "For instance, our night shift maintenance team works diligently to ensure that our medical professionals arrive each morning to a pristine environment. It's really quite admirable how people find ways to contribute according to their capabilities." The visiting executives nodded politely, their attention already moving on to more interesting aspects of the tour. None of them bothered to actually look at Samantha, who had paused in her work to allow the group to pass. If they had really looked, they might have noticed the way she automatically assessed their group's movement patterns, the exits, and potential security vulnerabilities. But to them, she was simply part of the hospital's invisible infrastructure, no more worthy of attention than the ventilation system or the emergency lighting. As the night wore on, Samantha continued her methodical work, each encounter reinforcing the same pattern: dismissal, condescension, and the casual assumption that her uniform defined her capabilities. But beneath her quiet exterior, other instincts were stirring. Her pilot's training had taught her to constantly monitor her environment for anomalies, threats, and changes in normal patterns. And tonight, as she moved through the halls of Cedar Ridge Medical Center, those finely tuned senses were beginning to detect something that didn't belong, something that would soon transform her from invisible janitor to the only person standing between the hospital and disaster. At 12:47 a.m., Samantha was cleaning the windows near the main stairwell when her peripheral vision caught something that made her freeze. Through the glass, she could see into the parking garage below, where 3 unmarked vans had positioned themselves at strategic points around the building's perimeter. The vehicles were dark, unremarkable, and spaced at intervals that would be invisible to casual observation, but formed a perfect tactical pattern for controlling access and escape routes. Her pilot's training kicked in automatically. During combat missions, she had learned to spot enemy vehicle formations from thousands of feet in the air, identifying threats by their positioning and movement patterns rather than their appearance. These vans weren't random parking, they were a coordinated deployment. Samantha moved to the next window, maintaining her cleaning routine while gathering intelligence. Each van had at least 2 occupants, visible as shadows behind tinted windshields. Their engines were running, exhaust visible in the cold night air, suggesting they were prepared for immediate movement. Most telling of all, the drivers maintained constant radio contact, evidenced by the brief flashes of interior light as they lifted communication devices to their faces. This was surveillance, or preparation for something worse. Dr. Lawson appeared around the corner, still carrying files from his extended meeting. He noticed Samantha's intense focus on the windows and scoffed audibly. "I suppose even window washing requires deep concentration when you're operating at that intellectual level," he muttered to himself, loud enough for her to hear. "Though I can't imagine what she thinks she's looking at out there." Samantha continued her work without reaction, but her mind was racing through tactical assessments. The van positions created overlapping fields of observation, covering every entrance and exit. If this was hostile surveillance, the hospital was being systematically prepared for some kind of operation. During her military service, she had seen similar patterns before airstrikes, extraction operations, and coordinated ground assaults. She needed to verify her assessment, but approaching any of the medical staff would be futile. They had already demonstrated their unwillingness to take her seriously about anything, let alone potential security threats that required immediate action. Nurse Coleman appeared from the patient wing, wheeling a cart of medical supplies. She spotted Samantha and immediately adopted the exasperated expression that had become familiar throughout the night. "Are you seriously still working on those windows?" Coleman asked incredulously. "I mean, how long does it take to spray some cleaner and wipe down glass?" "This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say we need higher standards for maintenance staff." "I'm being thorough," Samantha replied quietly, her eyes continuing to monitor the garage while maintaining her cleaning motions. "Thorough?" Coleman laughed. "Honey, you're cleaning windows, not performing brain surgery. Although I suppose for someone like you, window cleaning might actually be challenging." What Coleman couldn't have known was that Samantha was simultaneously tracking multiple moving targets, calculating sightlines and defensive positions, and formulating preliminary threat assessments. Cognitive multitasking that had once enabled her to manage complex air-to-ground combat operations, while maintaining formation with other aircraft and monitoring for surface-to-air missile threats. Security. Chief Hudson's radio crackled to life as he passed through the hallway. Samantha's trained ears immediately picked up fragments of the transmission. Perimeter, check complete. All stations report normal. Maintain current positions. The timing was too perfect. Hudson was conducting routine security sweeps while unknown vehicles established tactical positions around the building. Either this was an extraordinary coincidence, or someone had inside knowledge of the hospital security protocols. Samantha moved her cart toward the elevator bank, positioning herself where she could observe both the parking garage and the main entrance. Her movement appeared random to casual observers, but she was actually conducting reconnaissance that would have impressed her. Former squadron commanders. Dr. Pierce emerged from his office, clearly irritated by something he'd discovered. During his paperwork review, he spotted Samantha and immediately found a target for his frustration. "This is ridiculous," he announced to no one in particular. "We have cleaning staff wandering around night, and they still can't manage to properly sanitize the high-touch surfaces. I found dust on equipment that should have been cleaned hours ago." He approached Samantha directly, his voice rising with each word. "Do you understand that this is a medical facility? That people's lives depend on maintaining sterile environments? Or is that concept too complicated for someone in your position?" Samantha met his gaze with the same steady composure she had once used when receiving mission briefings under extreme pressure. "I understand the importance of maintaining proper standards, Doctor. Then why am I finding contaminated surfaces throughout the building?" Pierce demanded. "Are you actually trained in proper sanitation procedures, or did they just hand you a mop and hope for the best?" What Pierce couldn't have known was that Samantha had completed extensive training in CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, defense protocols during her military service. She understood contamination control, decontamination procedures, and environmental hazard management at levels that far exceeded hospital sanitation requirements. But explaining this would have required revealing her background and her instincts. Told her that maintaining her cover was crucial until she understood the developing threat. "I follow all established protocols, sir," she replied diplomatically. Pierce shook his head in disgust. "This is what happens when hospitals prioritize cost savings over competence. We end up with maintenance staff who probably can't even read the safety labels on their own cleaning supplies." As Pierce stormed away, muttering about declining standards and inappropriate hiring practices, Samantha returned her attention to the parking garage. The vans had adjusted their positions slightly, optimizing their coverage of the building's approaches. This wasn't random repositioning, it was tactical refinement by operators who understood surveillance and control techniques. Her pilot training had included extensive study of asymmetric warfare tactics, terrorist operations, and unconventional threats to military installations. The pattern developing around Cedar Ridge Medical Center matched several scenarios from her military education, none of them benign. Detective Murphy reappeared from whatever office he had been visiting, looking satisfied that his routine business was concluded. As he waited for the elevator, he glanced at Samantha with mild curiosity. "Working late tonight?" he observed conversationally. "Yes, sir," Samantha replied, recognizing an opportunity to test her concerns. "Has there been any unusual activity in the area lately? I noticed some unfamiliar vehicles in the parking structure." Murphy's expression immediately shifted to one of mild amusement. "Vehicles in a hospital parking garage? That's kind of what parking garages are for, isn't it?" He chuckled at what he perceived as a naive observation from someone clearly unqualified to assess anything beyond basic cleaning duties. "I wouldn't worry about vehicles, miss. Focus on your mops and let the professionals handle security concerns." The elevator arrived, and Murphy stepped inside. still smiling at what he considered an amusing interaction with an overwrought janitor. As the doors closed, Samantha realized that her window for gathering intelligence through official channels rapidly closing. Hospital. Administrator Mitchell returned to the floor with her entourage of visiting executives, their tour apparently continuing into the late evening. Their animated conversation about facility capabilities and medical innovation created perfect cover for Samantha to move closer to the exterior windows. "Our security systems are state-of-the-art," Mitchell was explaining proudly. "We have comprehensive surveillance coverage and professional security staff monitoring all access points 24 hours a day." Samantha glanced toward the security office, where she could see Hudson's staff monitoring their bank of surveillance screens. But their attention was focused on interior corridors and patient areas. None of the displays showed the parking garage angles that would reveal the tactical vehicle deployment she had observed. The visiting executives nodded approvingly at Mitchell's security presentation, completely unaware that potential threats were positioning themselves beyond the reach of the very systems being praised as comprehensive protection. As the tour group moved away, discussing expansion plans and additional security investments, Samantha made a critical decision. Her military training had taught her that threats rarely announce themselves through official channels. Sometimes the only warning came from trained eyes noticing patterns that others missed. She had identified a potential threat. The hospital's official security apparatus had failed to detect it, and every person in authority had demonstrated their unwillingness to take her observations seriously, which meant that if something was indeed about to happen at Cedar Ridge Medical Center, Samantha Phoenix Wells might be the only person in position to respond, regardless of what anyone thought about her day job. At 1:23 a.m., Samantha's worst fears began to materialize. While emptying trash bins near the emergency department, she noticed a subtle but unmistakable change in the hospital's rhythm. The normal flow of ambulances had stopped completely. No new arrivals for over 40 minutes, which was unprecedented for a Friday night in a major metropolitan area. Her military training had taught her to recognize pattern disruptions as early warning indicators. During combat operations, sudden changes in enemy communication patterns, air traffic, or ground movement often preceded major attacks. The absence of emergency medical traffic suggested that incoming ambulances were being diverted elsewhere, possibly through false communications or route manipulation. She moved to a window overlooking the main ambulance bay and confirmed her suspicions. The area that should have been bustling with emergency vehicles stood eerily empty, illuminated only by the lonely glow of the loading dock lights. 2 ambulances sat parked and apparently abandoned, their crews nowhere to be seen. Dr. Bryant appeared from the emergency department, looking increasingly frustrated as she spoke into her phone. "I don't understand why dispatch keeps rerouting everyone to Metro General," she was saying. "We have full capacity here, and our trauma team is standing by. This makes no sense." She noticed Samantha nearby and immediately vented her frustration. "On a convenient target. And now I have to deal with maintenance staff wandering around the emergency department during a crisis. Don't you have floors to mop somewhere else?" "I was just," Samantha began, but Dr. Bryant cut her off with an impatient gesture. "Look, I don't have time to explain hospital protocols to cleaning staff. The emergency department is for medical professionals only. Find somewhere else to empty your little trash cans." What Dr. Bryant couldn't have known was that Samantha was conducting tactical reconnaissance that had already identified multiple security anomalies. The missing ambulances, the diverted emergency traffic, and the suspicious vehicles in the parking garage formed a pattern that any military intelligence officer would have recognized as preparation for a coordinated operation. Samantha moved toward the main lobby, maintaining her janitorial routine while gathering more intelligence. The hospital's information desk was staffed by a single security guard who appeared to be monitoring his phone more than the entrance. Through the main windows, she could see that the tactical vehicles had been joined by additional personnel. Dark figures moving between the vans with the disciplined coordination of trained operators. Maintenance Supervisor Jackson appeared with his clipboard, clearly agitated about something he'd discovered during his rounds. "Wells," he called out sharply, "I've been getting reports that you're spending too much time in restricted areas. The medical staff is complaining about maintenance workers appearing in departments where they don't belong." Samantha paused in her work, recognizing an opportunity to test the waters. "Sir, I've noticed some unusual activity around the building perimeter. There are vehicles positioned in ways that seem—" Jackson interrupted with an exasperated sigh. "Vehicles? What are you talking about? This is a hospital. There are always vehicles around here. Ambulances, delivery trucks, staff cars. That's how hospitals work." He leaned closer, his voice taking on the condescending tone that had become familiar throughout the night. "Look, I understand that this job might seem exciting to someone like you, but you're not a security guard. You're not a detective. You push a mop and empty trash cans, that's it. Stop trying to turn routine hospital operations into some kind of mystery." "I understand, sir," Samantha replied quietly, though her trained mind was already cataloging Jackson's dismissive response as another failure of the hospital's security awareness. As Jackson walked away, muttering about overactive imaginations and people who watch too much TV, Samantha continued her reconnaissance. The patterns were becoming clearer and more ominous. Someone had systematically isolated the hospital by diverting emergency traffic, positioning tactical vehicles around the perimeter, and exploiting the predictable blindness of authority figures who refused to take warnings seriously. Security. Chief Hudson reappeared on his rounds, this time accompanied by Detective Murphy, who had apparently decided to extend his visit. Their conversation was animated, suggesting they were discussing something more significant than routine hospital business. Haven single quotes D had a single emergency transport in over an hour, Hudson was saying. Dispatch claims they're routing everything to other facilities due to some kind of communication system maintenance, but nobody told us about any scheduled maintenance. Murphy nodded thoughtfully. Could be a technical glitch. These things happen with emergency services coordination. I wouldn't read too much into it unless the pattern continues. Samantha positioned herself within earshot, hoping that the security chief might demonstrate more awareness than the medical staff, but Hudson's next words crushed that hope. "The medical staff is getting anxious about the quiet night, but honestly, it's probably just a coincidence. Maybe there's a major incident somewhere else that's drawing all the emergency traffic." "Makes sense," Murphy agreed. "Sometimes these patterns are just random fluctuations. Not everything is a conspiracy." As they continued their discussion, completely missing the tactical implications of the communication disruption, Samantha realized that even the hospital security personnel lacked the training to recognize sophisticated threat indicators. Nurse Coleman appeared from the patient wing, wheeling a cart loaded with medical supplies. She spotted Samantha and immediately launched into another lecture about workplace boundaries. "There you are again," Coleman said with obvious irritation. "I swear you're everywhere tonight. Don't you have a specific assignment area? It's like you're wandering around aimlessly, getting in everyone's way." "I'm covering for a colleague who called in sick," Samantha replied, sticking to her prepared cover story. "Well, try to be less visible," Coleman said dismissively. "The patients are asking questions about why there's a cleaning lady constantly walking around. It makes them nervous, like something's wrong with the facility." What the patients were actually sensing, Samantha realized, was her heightened state of tactical awareness. Civilians often perceived military alertness as unusual behavior, even when they couldn't identify exactly what seemed different. Her constant movement and observation were survival instincts honed through combat experience, but to hospital staff, They appeared to be the confused wanderings of an incompetent worker. Dr. Lawson emerged from his office, checking his watch. With obvious concern, he was clearly troubled by something, and when he spotted Samantha, he found an outlet for his anxiety. "The emergency department is reporting communication issues with dispatch services," he announced to no one in particular. "And meanwhile, we have maintenance staff roaming around like they own the place. This whole night has been one disruption after another." He approached Samantha directly, his voice rising with frustration. "I don't know what kind of training you received, but professional maintenance workers are supposed to be invisible. We shouldn't even know you're here." "I apologize for any disruption, Doctor," Samantha replied, maintaining her civilian cover while internally noting that Dr. Lawson had inadvertently confirmed another piece of the developing pattern. Communication issues, she thought to herself. Emergency traffic diversions, tactical vehicle positioning. Someone is systematically isolating this facility. Dr. Lawson continued his lecture, completely unaware that he was providing valuable intelligence to someone trained to analyze such information. "The last thing we need during a communication crisis is additional chaos from support staff who can't follow basic protocols." As he walked away, still muttering about professional standards and appropriate behavior, Samantha made a critical assessment. The threat was escalating according to a sophisticated operational plan. The hospital's leadership remained oblivious to the developing crisis, and time was running out for her to determine whether this was surveillance, preparation for robbery, or something far worse. That her pilot instincts told her that the tactical positioning, communication disruption, and systematic isolation meant only one thing: Cedar Ridge Medical Center was being prepared for an operation that would put every person inside at risk. But convincing anyone to listen to a janitor's concerns about tactical threats was proving impossible, which meant that Samantha would have to prepare for the worst-case scenario on her own. At 1:47 a.m., Samantha's military training screamed at her that the situation had crossed from suspicious to imminent threat. Through the parking garage windows, she could see the tactical teams had deployed additional personnel, at least 12. Individuals now visible, moving with the coordinated precision of special operations forces. But these weren't law enforcement. Their equipment and positioning suggested something far more sinister. She made the decision to break her cover and attempt direct communication with hospital security, despite the risks. Moving quickly to the main security office, she found Hudson reviewing routine reports while completely unaware of the tactical deployments surrounding his facility. "Excuse me, Chief Hudson," Samantha said, abandoning her usual deferential tone. "I need to report a serious security threat. There are armed personnel positioning themselves around the building perimeter." Hudson looked up from his paperwork with barely concealed annoyance. "Armed personnel? What are you talking about? Are you seeing things that aren't there?" "No, sir. I've identified at least 12 individuals with tactical equipment establishing control positions around all exit points. This appears to be preparation for a coordinated assault on the facility." Hudson's expression shifted from annoyance to outright disbelief. "Lady, do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound? Armed assault? This is a hospital, not a military base. You've been watching too many action movies." He stood up clearly, intending to end the conversation. "Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but maintenance workers aren't qualified to assess security threats. If there were actually armed people around the building, don't you think trained security professionals would have noticed?" "Sir, I have experience in threat assessment," Samantha began, but Hudson cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Experience? In what, mopping floors? I've been in security for 15 years, and I can tell you that panicky cleaning ladies are not reliable sources of intelligence about tactical operations." He activated his radio, speaking in the condescending tone of someone addressing a child. "All units, this is Hudson. Maintenance staff is reporting suspicious activity in the parking areas. Can anyone confirm unusual vehicle presence? The responses came back immediately. Negative, Chief. All areas appear normal. No unusual activity observed. Standard parking patterns throughout the facility. Hudson smiled with satisfaction. See? Professional security personnel don't see any of these imaginary threats you're worried about. Maybe you should stick to emptying trash cans and leave security assessments to people who actually know what they're doing. What Hudson couldn't have known was that Samantha's experience in threat assessment included advanced training in asymmetric warfare, terrorist operations, and close air support for ground forces under attack. She had identified and engaged actual enemy forces in real combat situations, making split-second tactical decisions that had saved countless lives. But explaining this would require revealing her military background, which could compromise her ability to respond if when the attack materialized. "I understand your position, sir," Samantha replied quietly, already formulating alternative approaches. "Thank you for checking." As she left the security office, Hudson was already dismissing the incident to his staff. "Nervous cleaning lady," she heard him say. "They see shadows and think it's some kind of invasion. We get this kind of paranoia from civilian workers who don't understand how real security operations work." Samantha's next attempt focused on Detective Murphy, who was still in the building completing his paperwork. She found him near the administrative offices, looking tired but approachable. "Detective Murphy," she said, adopting the respectful but urgent tone she had once used when reporting enemy positions to commanding officers. "I need to report what I believe is preparation for a hostile operation against this facility." Murphy looked up from his reports with mild interest that quickly shifted to skepticism. "Hostile operation? What kind of hostile operation?" "There are tactical vehicles positioned at strategic points around the building, with personnel conducting what appears to be reconnaissance and positioning for coordinated assault. The communication disruptions and emergency traffic diversions suggest systematic preparation for isolating the facility." Murphy studied her for a moment, clearly trying to decide whether this was a legitimate concern or the ramblings of an overwrought civilian. "Ma'am, are you saying you think someone is planning to attack the hospital?" "Yes, sir. Based on the tactical patterns I've observed, this facility is being prepared for some kind of operation within the next few hours." Murphy's expression shifted to the patronizing concern typically reserved for dealing with mentally unstable individuals. "Okay, I understand you're worried about something. But let me ask you this. What kind of training do you have that qualifies you to recognize tactical patterns and coordinated assault preparations?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Samantha could either reveal her military background, potentially compromising her operational security, or continue to appear as an unqualified civilian making wild claims. "I've had some personal experience with security situations," she said. Carefully, Murphy nodded with the expression of someone who had solved the puzzle. "I see. Look, ma'am, I appreciate that you're concerned about hospital safety, but identifying actual tactical threats requires specialized training that most civilians don't have. What you're probably seeing is normal security activity, delivery, vehicles, or staff arriving for shift changes." He leaned forward slightly, adopting the tone he might use with a confused elderly relative. "Hospital parking areas can look pretty active at night, especially if you're not familiar with normal operations. But I can assure you that if there were actually armed groups preparing to attack this facility, law enforcement would already be aware of it." "Detective, with respect, the positioning I've observed follows classic patterns for..." "Classic patterns?" Murphy interrupted with a slight smile. "Ma'am, where exactly did you learn about classic patterns for tactical operations? Did you take some kind of online course in military strategy?" The dismissiveness in his voice was unmistakable. To Murphy, she was clearly a civilian with an overactive imagination, possibly someone who had consumed too much military-themed entertainment, and now believed herself capable of recognizing actual threats. "I understand your skepticism," Samantha replied, maintaining her composure despite the growing urgency of the situation. "But I strongly recommend that you verify my observations through official channels." Murphy nodded diplomatically. "Tell you what, I'll make a note in my report about your concerns. If anything unusual develops, we'll have a record of your observations." His tone made it clear that he considered this a charitable gesture toward a well-meaning but confused civilian, not a serious security assessment worthy of immediate action. As Murphy returned to his paperwork, effectively dismissing her concerns as irrelevant, Samantha realized that her attempts to work through official channels had failed completely. Every authority figure in the building had demonstrated the same pattern: automatic dismissal of warnings from someone they perceived as unqualified to make such assessments. She moved toward the patient wing, hoping that medical staff might be more receptive to concerns about facility security. But her encounter with Dr. Pierce quickly destroyed that hope. "Doctor," she said, approaching him as he reviewed patient charts, "I believe there's an immediate security threat to the hospital. I've observed tactical positioning that suggests—" "Excuse me?" Dr. Pierce looked up with the expression of someone who had been interrupted by a particularly persistent insect. "Did you just say tactical positioning? Are you seriously trying to discuss military strategy with a medical professional?" His voice rose with each word, drawing attention from nearby nurses and orderlies. "This is exactly the kind of inappropriate behavior I was talking about earlier. Maintenance staff inserting themselves into situations they couldn't possibly understand." Nurse Coleman appeared, drawn by the commotion. "What's happening here?" "Apparently, our cleaning lady has decided she's a security expert," Dr. Pierce announced loudly. "She's trying to warn me about some kind of military threat to the hospital." Coleman laughed outright. "Oh, that's rich. Next thing you know, she'd be offering to perform surgery." The gathering crowd of medical staff began, treating Samantha's warnings as entertainment rather than legitimate concerns. Their laughter and dismissive comments created a humiliating spectacle that effectively ended any possibility of convincing them to take defensive action. As the medical staff dispersed, still chuckling about the delusional janitor who thought she understood tactical operations, Samantha faced a stark reality. She was completely alone in recognizing the approaching threat. Time was running out. The tactical teams were moving closer to operational readiness, and every person in authority had demonstrated their unwillingness to listen to warnings from someone they considered beneath their notice. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At 2:15 a.m., Samantha's worst fears materialized into undeniable reality. While conducting what appeared to be routine cleaning near the main entrance, she witnessed the tactical teams begin their final positioning phase. The dark figures moved with military precision, establishing overwatch positions and preparing the equipment that was unmistakably designed for breaching operations. Through the reinforced glass doors, she could see personnel wearing tactical gear and carrying weapons that were definitely not standard law enforcement issue. These were private military contractors or specialized assault teams, and they were minutes away from executing whatever operation they had planned for Cedar Ridge Medical Center. Her pilot training kicked into emergency protocols mode. During combat missions, there came a moment when all planning ended and immediate action became the only option for survival. That moment had arrived. She moved quickly to the hospital's main communication center, knowing that her last hope lay in triggering some kind of emergency response that would bring real security forces to the facility. But when she attempted to access the emergency alert systems, she discovered that several key functions had been disabled or compromised. The communication sabotage confirmed her worst suspicions. This wasn't a random attack, it was a sophisticated Operation executed by professionals who had studied the hospital security systems and neutralized them systematically. Hospital Administrator Mitchell appeared in the hallway, still engaged in her extended tour with the visiting executives. Their conversation about facility security and emergency preparedness created a surreal backdrop to the approaching crisis. Our emergency communication systems are integrated with city-wide first responder networks, Mitchell was explaining proudly. In any crisis situation, we can have police, fire, and emergency medical support here within minutes. Samantha approached the group with desperate urgency, abandoning all pretense of maintaining her cover as a simple maintenance worker. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she had once used when reporting critical mission parameters to commanding officers. "This facility is under immediate threat. Armed tactical teams are positioning for assault, and your communication systems have been compromised." The visiting executive stopped mid-conversation, staring at Samantha with a mixture of confusion and alarm. Mitchell's face flushed with embarrassment at having her professional presentation interrupted by what appeared to be a delusional employee. "Security," Mitchell called out sharply. "We have a maintenance worker experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. Please escort her from the premises immediately." One of the visiting executives leaned closer to Mitchell. "Is this normal? Do you often have staff members making these kinds of ... claims?" Mitchell's mortification was complete. "Absolutely not. This is highly unusual and completely unacceptable. I sincerely apologize for this disruption to our facility tour." She turned to Samantha with barely controlled fury. "You are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and if you attempt to return to this facility, you will be arrested for trespassing." Security Chief Hudson appeared within moments, having been summoned by Mitchell's radio call. His expression showed a mixture of irritation and vindication clearly. He felt that his earlier dismissal of Samantha's concerns had been proven correct by what he perceived as her mental breakdown. "Ma'am," Hudson said firmly, "you need to come with me. You're being removed from the facility for disruptive behavior and making false emergency claims." "Chief Hudson," Samantha said, making one final attempt to penetrate his professional blindness. "Look at the parking garage. Count the vehicles. Check their positioning. Verify your communication links with external agencies. You have minutes before this facility is under attack." Hudson's response was swift and dismissive. "That's enough. You've made several false claims tonight, disrupted hospital operations, and now you're frightening visitors with paranoid fantasies. You're leaving immediately." He gestured to two security officers who had arrived to assist with the removal. "Escort her to the exit and ensure she leaves the property. If she attempts to return, call the police and have her arrested." As the security team prepared to physically remove her from the building, Samantha made a final assessment of her options. Revealing her military background might convince them to listen, but it would also compromise her ability to respond tactically. If the assault proceeded as planned, the tactical teams outside had achieved final positioning. The hospital security force remained oblivious to the threat. The communication systems had been compromised, and she was about to be forcibly removed from the only position where she might be able to mount effective resistance. Dr. Bryant appeared from the emergency department, drawn by the commotion in the main lobby. When she saw security officers preparing to escort Samantha out, her expression showed satisfaction at what she perceived as overdue accountability. "Finally," Bryant said to her colleague Dr. Cross, who had also emerged to observe the situation, "I've been saying all night that we need better screening for maintenance staff. This woman has been acting strange since she arrived." Dr. Cross nodded approvingly. "Wandering around restricted areas, asking inappropriate questions, and now apparently having some kind of paranoid episode. It's exactly what I was talking about regarding hiring standards." The medical staff gathered in the lobby began treating Samantha's removal as validation of their superior judgment. Their whispered comments about unstable employees and appropriate security measures created a chorus of professional self-congratulation. Nurse Coleman appeared with several colleagues, clearly enjoying the spectacle of the troublesome janitor finally being held accountable. "I told everyone she was acting weird tonight," Coleman announced to anyone within earshot. Walking around like she owned the place, staring out windows, asking strange questions. Obviously, she's having some kind of psychological problem. As the security officers flanked her and began moving toward the exit, Samantha made a desperate calculation. She could submit to removal and hope that the assault would somehow fail without her intervention. Or she could reveal her true capabilities and attempt to coordinate defense of the facility. But before she could decide between these impossible choices, the decision was made for her. The lights throughout the hospital flickered once, twice, then stabilized with several electronic systems, emitted soft beeping sounds that indicated power fluctuations or communication disruptions. To the medical staff, this appeared to be routine electrical maintenance. To Samantha, it was the unmistakable signature of electronic warfare equipment being used to disable security and communication systems. The assault was beginning. Through the main entrance windows, she could see the tactical teams moving from concealment toward their final assault positions. They carried equipment designed for rapid entry and crowd control, suggesting their objective was not destruction, but capture or control of the facility and its occupants. "The attack is starting," she said quietly to Hudson, who was still focused on completing her removal rather than monitoring actual security threats. "What attack?" Hudson replied with exasperation. "There is no attack. You're having delusions, and you're being removed for the safety of patients and staff." But even as he spoke, his radio crackled with confused transmissions from security personnel reporting communication difficulties and equipment malfunctions throughout the facility. Samantha realized with crystal clarity that she had reached the point where all conventional options had been exhausted. Every authority figure had dismissed her warnings. The assault force was moving into final position, and within minutes, everyone in Cedar Ridge Medical Center would be facing a crisis they were completely unprepared to handle. The woman they had all dismissed as an incompetent janitor was about to become their only hope for survival, whether they recognized it or not. At 2:18 a.m., 3 sharp explosions echoed through the hospital's main entrance as flashbang grenades detonated in the lobby. The visiting executives screamed and dove for cover behind the reception desk, while medical staff stood frozen in shock and confusion. Through the smoke and chaos, tactical teams poured through the compromised entrance with military precision. Samantha's combat instincts overrode every civilian consideration. As the security officers who had been escorting her stumbled backward in panic, she broke free from their grip and immediately assessed the tactical situation with the trained eye of a fighter pilot who had survived multiple combat engagements. Assault force consisted of 12 operators in full tactical gear, carrying weapons designed for close-quarters combat and crowd control. Their movement patterns indicated professional military training. They established overlapping fields of fire, secured key choke points, and began systematically controlling access routes with the efficiency of special operations forces. But they had made one critical error in their intelligence gathering. They had planned for a soft target, populated by panicked civilians and undertrained security personnel. They had not planned for the presence of a decorated combat veteran who understood their tactics better than they did. Samantha dropped to a combat crouch behind the reception desk, her body automatically adopting the stance she had used during aircraft emergency procedures and ground combat training. The terrified executives cowering beside her stared in amazement as the mentally unstable janitor transformed before their eyes into someone who moved with deadly purpose and tactical awareness. "Stay down and don't move," she commanded in the authoritative tone she had once used when coordinating with ground forces under enemy fire. Her voice carried an unmistakable quality of command that made even Hospital Administrator Mitchell instinctively obey. Security Chief Hudson, who had been confidently dismissing her warnings moments earlier, now found himself completely out of his depth. His hand trembled as he reached for his radio, only to discover that communications had been completely jammed by the assault team's electronic warfare equipment. "The radios are dead," he stammered, his professional composure evaporating in the face of an actual crisis. "I can't reach my security team. I can't contact police. What do we do?" Samantha was already moving, using her knowledge of the hospital's layout, gained during hours of seemingly aimless wandering, to identify tactical advantages that the assault team couldn't have anticipated. Her cleaning duties had given her access to service corridors, maintenance areas, and alternate routes that weren't marked on standard building plans. "Follow me," she told the group of terrified civilians. "Stay low, move quietly, and do exactly what I tell you." Dr. Bryant, who had spent the entire night dismissing Samantha as intellectually inferior, now found herself following orders from the same woman she had mocked. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, but survival instincts overrode professional prejudice. Samantha led the group through a maintenance corridor that connected to the hospital's central service area. Her movement was fluid and purposeful, every step calculated to minimize noise and avoid the assault team's likely patrol routes. This was tactical movement under pressure, skills honed through military training that civilian security guards never received. Behind them, they could hear the assault teams barking orders and herding hospital staff into centralized areas. The operation was proceeding according to plan, except for the small group that had vanished into areas the attackers didn't know existed. "How does she know about these passages?" Dr. Cross whispered to his colleague, his earlier condescension replaced by genuine bewilderment. Samantha paused at a junction between corridors, listening intently to sounds that would have been meaningless to civilian ears, but told her exactly where the tactical teams were positioned and how they were coordinating their sweep of the building. Her pilot training had included extensive study of enemy tactics, communication patterns, and operational procedures. She could identify their command structure, predict their movement patterns, and exploit their blind spots with the precision of someone who had once conducted similar operations from the air. "They're using standard room clearing procedures," she explained quietly to Hudson, who was staring at her with growing recognition that he had completely misjudged her capabilities. "Three-man teams, overlapping coverage, systematic progression through predetermined zones. But they're following textbook patterns, which makes them predictable." Hudson's training had never covered anything beyond basic security protocols. He was completely unprepared for sophisticated tactical operations, and his growing reliance on Samantha's expertise was both humbling and terrifying. From her position in the service corridor, Samantha could observe the assault team's command post, established in the main lobby where they could control access and monitor their operational communications. Their leader was coordinating with external units, confirming that the hospital had been successfully isolated and secured, but isolation worked both ways. The same electronic jamming that prevented hospital staff from calling for help also limited the assault team's ability to coordinate with external support or adapt to unexpected complications. Samantha began formulating a counter-operation using principles she had learned during close air support missions: identify enemy weaknesses, exploit communication vulnerabilities, and strike at critical points that would disrupt their entire operational structure. "I need to reach the hospital's emergency broadcast system," she told Hudson. "There's a manual override in the basement maintenance area that bypasses their jamming equipment." Hudson stared at her in amazement. "How do you know about manual overrides?" "That information isn't available to maintenance staff. I read the building schematics during my training," Samantha replied. which was technically true, though her training had been conducted during her military service when she had learned to analyze facility layouts for tactical purposes. She began moving through the service corridors with increasing confidence, her mental map of the building's vulnerabilities becoming clearer with each step. The assault team had planned for conventional resistance from undertrained security guards. They had not planned for someone who understood their operational procedures and could think 3 moves ahead. Dr. Pierce, who had earlier lectured her about appropriate behavior for people in her position, now found himself completely dependent on her tactical expertise. The role reversal was staggering. The woman he had dismissed as intellectually inferior was now the only person capable of organizing effective resistance. "Stay close to me," Samantha instructed the group as they approached the basement access point. "When we reach the communications center, I need everyone to remain absolutely silent while I work." Nurse Coleman, who had spent the night mocking Samantha's competence, now watched in awe as the delusional janitor demonstrated knowledge of building systems and tactical procedures that surpassed anything taught in civilian security training. As they descended toward the basement, Samantha's military bearing became increasingly evident. Her posture, her movement patterns, her tactical awareness, everything about her suggested extensive combat training that was completely inconsistent with her cover identity as a hospital maintenance worker. Hospital Administrator Mitchell, who had fired her less than an hour earlier, now realized that she had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The woman she had dismissed as a mental health crisis was demonstrating capabilities that suggested military or law enforcement background far beyond anything in her personnel file. But there was no time for explanations or apologies. The assault team was systematically securing the hospital, rounding up staff and patients according to their operational plan. Within minutes, they would realize that a small group had escaped their initial sweep and begin expanding their search into areas they had initially considered secure. Samantha reached the basement communications center and began working with equipment that should have been unfamiliar to a simple maintenance worker. Her hands moved across control panels and override switches with the confidence of someone who had operated far more complex systems under much more dangerous circumstances. "How do you know how to operate this equipment?" Mitchell asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samantha looked up from the communications panel, her eyes reflecting the steely determination that had once carried her through combat missions over hostile territory. "Because I'm not who you think I am," she replied quietly. "And right now, that might be the only thing keeping all of you alive." At 2:31 a.m., Samantha successfully activated the hospital's emergency broadcast system using override codes that she accessed through her knowledge of military standard communication protocols. The manual system bypassed the assault team's jamming equipment and began transmitting automated distress signals to every emergency service frequency in the metropolitan area. Within moments, her tactical gambit paid off. The assault team's radio chatter, which she could monitor through the hospital's security system, revealed growing confusion as their operations secrecy was compromised. Their leader was demanding explanations for how emergency broadcasts had been activated when their electronic warfare specialists had confirmed all communication systems were disabled. But Samantha wasn't finished. Her fighter pilot training had taught her that successful operations required multiple simultaneous attacks on different targets. While the emergency broadcast drew external attention, she needed to disrupt the assault team's internal coordination. Moving through service corridors with the confidence of someone who had navigated far more dangerous environments, she reached the hospital's main electrical control room. The assault team had posted no guards here, a tactical oversight that revealed they had underestimated both the building's complexity and the possibility of organized resistance. "What are you doing?" Hudson whispered as Samantha began working with electrical control panels that were supposedly restricted to specialized technicians. "Creating tactical advantages," she replied, her hands moving across switches and circuit breakers with practiced efficiency. When I cut power to specific sections, their night vision equipment will give them an advantage. But if I cut power systematically, they'll lose communication relays and have to rely on backup systems that I can manipulate. Dr. Lawson, who had spent the night lecturing her about intellectual limitations, watched in amazement as she demonstrated knowledge of building systems that surpassed his own understanding. How do you know about electrical grid management? That's not maintenance work, that's engineering. Advanced electrical systems were part of my previous training, Samantha replied, not wanting to reveal the full extent of her military background. While she was still coordinating tactical operations, her plan was elegant and devastating. By cutting power to specific zones in calculated sequence, she forced the assault teams to reposition repeatedly while disrupting their communication coordination. Each power interruption created confusion and forced them to adapt to changing conditions, exactly the kind of tactical pressure that degraded operational effectiveness. The results were immediate. Through the hospital's internal communication system, she could hear the assault team leader growing increasingly frustrated as his carefully planned operation began unraveling. Units were losing contact with each other. Their systematic sweep was being disrupted by changing visibility conditions, and emergency responders were beginning to arrive in response to the automated distress signals. Dr. Bryant, who had earlier dismissed Samantha as intellectually inferior, now found herself completely dependent on tactical expertise that she couldn't comprehend. The way you're manipulating these systems, this isn't maintenance knowledge. What kind of training did you actually receive? Samantha paused in her work to monitor the assault team's radio traffic, which was becoming increasingly chaotic as their operation devolved from systematic control to reactive crisis management. The kind of training that teaches you to think 3 moves ahead of your opponent, she replied quietly. And right now, they're losing operational control faster than they can adapt. Her assessment was proven correct within minutes. The assault team's communications revealed that they were receiving orders to abort their operation and withdraw before law enforcement arrived in overwhelming numbers. The automated emergency broadcasts had triggered responses from multiple agencies, creating exactly the kind of attention that their covert operation couldn't survive. But Samantha knew that withdrawal didn't mean surrender. Professional tactical teams had extraction protocols and contingency plans for failed operations. They would attempt to eliminate evidence and escape before authorities could identify them or determine their objectives. They're preparing to leave, she announced to the group of hospital staff who had spent the night dismissing her warnings. But they'll try to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence before they withdraw. Hospital Administrator Mitchell, who had fired her for making paranoid claims, now stared at her with growing recognition that every assessment had been accurate. How do you know what they're planning? How can you predict their actions? Because I understand how military operations work, Samantha replied, already moving toward the next phase of her counter-operation. And I know that their biggest vulnerability is that they still don't realize who they're dealing with. She led the group through service corridors toward a position where they could observe the assault team's withdrawal without being detected. Her movement patterns demonstrated tactical awareness that impressed even Hudson, whose security training had never covered anything approaching this level of sophistication. Through strategically positioned windows, they could see the tactical teams beginning their extraction procedures. Their movements were disciplined and professional, but Samantha's trained eye identified subtle signs of stress and hurried adaptation that indicated their operation had failed to achieve its objectives. Local law enforcement will arrive within 10 minutes, she announced after monitoring emergency service frequencies. Federal agencies will arrive within 30 minutes. The assault team knows they have a narrow window for escape, which means they'll prioritize speed over thoroughness. Dr. Cross, who had earlier mocked her intelligence, now found himself completely reliant on her tactical predictions. What does that mean for the hospital staff they've captured? It means they'll abandon non-essential objectives and focus on extraction, Samantha replied. They can't afford to maintain control over dozens of hostages while escaping from responding law enforcement. Her prediction proved accurate within minutes. The assault team began releasing hospital staff and patients as they consolidated toward their exit routes. Their carefully planned operation had devolved into an emergency withdrawal, exactly as Samantha had anticipated. But she wasn't content to simply observe their escape. Her military training had taught her that successful defensive operations required pursuing tactical advantages until the threat was completely neutralized. "I need to reach the parking garage," she told Hudson. "Their extraction vehicles are positioned there, and I can delay their departure until law enforcement arrives." Hudson stared at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Delay their departure? How exactly do you plan to stop a tactical team with military-grade equipment?" Samantha's expression carried the quiet confidence she had once displayed when accepting missions that other pilots considered impossible. "The same way I handled every other impossible situation during my military service, by using their assumptions against them." For the first time since the crisis began, someone asked the question that had been building throughout the night. "Military service?" Mitchell said slowly. "What kind of military service?" Samantha paused at the entrance to the corridor that would take her toward the parking garage and her final confrontation with the assault team. The hospital staff, who had spent hours dismissing her as an incompetent janitor, now waited for an odd answer that would finally explain the impossible competence they had witnessed. "The kind that taught me to never surrender when innocent lives are at stake," she replied. "And the kind that prepared me for situations exactly like this." As she moved toward her final objective, the same people who had mocked her throughout the night realized they were watching someone whose true capabilities were far beyond anything they had imagined, and that their survival had depended entirely on the woman they had refused to take seriously. At 2:44 a.m., as the first police sirens wailed in the distance, Samantha reached the parking garage where the assault team's extraction vehicles waited. But her approach to the tactical situation was unlike anything the hospital staff had witnessed from civilian security personnel. She moved with the calculated precision of someone who had once coordinated airstrikes against enemy positions. From her concealed position behind a concrete support pillar, she observed the assault team's withdrawal procedures. Their 3 tactical vehicles were positioned for rapid escape, with drivers maintaining communication through military-grade radio equipment. But Samantha's pilot training had taught her to identify critical vulnerabilities in even the most sophisticated operations. Dr. Pierce, who had followed her despite his terror, whispered urgently, "What are you planning to do? They have military weapons and training. You're just a what?" Samantha interrupted quietly, her voice carrying an edge of authority that made Pierce fall silent. "Just a maintenance worker who somehow predicted their assault, navigated their tactical deployment, disrupted their communications, and coordinated successful resistance against a professional military operation." The question hung in the air. As Pierce realized that every assumption he had made about her capabilities had been systematically proven wrong throughout the night, Security Chief Hudson, whose radio had finally regained functionality as the assault team's jamming equipment was withdrawn, received an urgent transmission that changed everything. His expression shifted from confusion to shock as he listened to the incoming message. "Federal agents are requesting to speak with ... double quotes." Hudson paused, checking his radio again. "They're requesting to speak with Colonel Samantha Wells, call sign Phoenix, regarding her assessment of the tactical situation." The words hit the gathered hospital staff like a physical blow. Dr. Bryant, who had spent the night lecturing about educational standards and intellectual competence, stared at Samantha. "With dawning comprehension, Colonel," Dr. Lawson whispered, his voice barely audible. You're a colonel? Samantha's posture shifted subtly, and for the first time since the crisis began, her civilian disguise completely fell away. The quiet janitor disappeared, replaced by the bearing and presence of a decorated military officer who had commanded respect from some of the most elite pilots in the Air Force. Colonel Samantha Phoenix Wells, she confirmed, her voice carrying the natural authority that had once led fighter squadrons through combat operations. United States Air Force, retired. Fighter pilot, close air support specialist, and tactical operations coordinator. Hospital administrator Mitchell, who had fired her for making paranoid claims, found herself face to face with the reality that she had dismissed warnings from one of the most qualified tactical assessment experts in the country. Fighter pilot? Nurse Coleman managed to stammer, her earlier condescension evaporating as she processed the magnitude of her misjudgment. A 10 Thunderbolt and F-16 Fighting Falcon, Samantha replied, monitoring the assault team's continued withdrawal while providing the explanation that was long overdue. 6 years of active duty, including 3 combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with Valor Device, and commendations for tactical excellence. Under enemy fire. Dr. Cross, who had earlier mocked her spatial awareness, now realized he had been criticizing someone whose job had required navigating 3-dimensional combat environments at 500 miles per hour while coordinating with ground forces and avoiding enemy missiles. But why? Hudson began, then stopped as the implications overwhelmed him. Why were you working as a janitor? Because military service doesn't automatically translate to civilian employment opportunities, Samantha replied matter-of-factly. Veterans often take whatever work is available while transitioning to civilian careers. I was supporting my sister through medical school while completing my own degree in aerospace engineering. The revelation recontextualized every interaction from the night. The incompetent janitor they had dismissed was actually someone whose military decorations indicated extraordinary competence under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. But there was no time for extended explanations. Samantha's radio crackled with incoming communication from the federal response team that was coordinating with local law enforcement. Colonel Wells, this is Agent Morrison, FBI Tactical Response. We're told you have eyes on the extraction vehicles and assessment of the opposition force. Samantha responded with the crisp professionalism that had characterized her military communications. Agent Morrison, opposition force consists of 12 operators with professional military training, currently conducting organized withdrawal to 3 vehicles in the hospital parking garage. Electronic warfare capabilities, close quarters combat equipment, and coordination consistent with private military contractors. Copy that, Colonel. Can you maintain observation and provide tactical guidance for our approach? Affirmative. I have concealed position with clear sight lines to all extraction vehicles. Opposition force appears to be prioritizing speed over security during withdrawal phase. The hospital staff listened in amazement as Samantha coordinated with federal agents using military terminology and tactical concepts that demonstrated expertise far beyond anything they had imagined possible. Dr. Bryant, who had earlier dismissed her as intellectually inferior, found herself witnessing a master class in tactical communication and operational coordination. How many people did you save during your military service? Mitchell asked quietly, her voice filled with the dawning recognition of how catastrophically she had misjudged the situation. Officially, the Air Medal cite direct support for operations that saved over 200 ground personnel. Samantha replied while continuing to monitor the tactical situation. Unofficially, every mission prevented enemy operations that could have cost hundreds of additional lives. The weight of her military record settled over the group like a revelation. They had spent the night dismissing warnings from someone who had literally made a career of identifying threats and coordinating life-saving responses under extreme pressure. "Colonel," Agent Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, "we're in position for coordinated approach. Opposition vehicles are attempting to depart the facility." Samantha observed the assault team's final movements with the analytical eye that had once tracked enemy aircraft through complex aerial engagements. "Agent Morrison, lead vehicle has engine trouble. Mechanical sabotage appears successful. Remaining vehicles are moving toward exit routes Alpha and Bravo. Recommend coordinated interdiction at choke points Charlie and Delta." "Copy that, Colonel. Excellent work tonight." As federal agents and local law enforcement converged on the remaining tactical vehicles, Samantha finally allowed herself a moment to address the hospital staff who had spent hours proving that expertise and competence were invisible to people who judged others by appearance and job titles. "The assault team has been neutralized," she announced quietly. "All hospital personnel are safe, and the facility is secure." Security Chief Hudson, whose training had proven completely inadequate for the night's events, looked at her with a mixture of awe and shame. "Colonel Wells, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express." "We all do," Dr. Pierce added, his voice heavy with the recognition of how wrong he had been about everything. Samantha's expression showed neither triumph nor accusation, only the quiet professionalism that had carried her through 6 years of military service where success was measured by lives saved rather than recognition received. "The important thing is that everyone survived," she said simply. "That's what matters." But as dawn began to break over Cedar Ridge Medical Center, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same for the people who had learned that heroes don't always announce themselves, and that the most important person in the room might be the one everyone assumes is least qualified to be there. As federal agents completed their sweep of the facility and emergency medical teams treated the few minor injuries sustained during the assault, Cedar Ridge Medical Center transformed into a hub of investigative activity. But the most dramatic transformation was occurring among the hospital staff who had spent the night dismissing the warnings of a decorated combat veteran. Dr. Gregory Lawson stood in the main lobby, staring at the point where Samantha had first tried to warn him about the tactical threat developing around the building. His earlier comments about minimum wage workers and people who probably didn't finish high school now echoed in his mind with sickening clarity. A federal agent approached him with a tablet displaying Samantha's military record. "Doctor, we need to verify the timeline of events." Colonel Wells indicated she attempted to warn medical staff about the developing threat. "Can you confirm your interactions with her?" Lawson's face drained of color as he read the service record. Graduated summa cum laude from the Air Force Academy. Top 5% of pilot training class. Multiple combat deployments with distinction. Advanced degrees in aeronautical engineering and military strategy. The woman he had lectured about intellectual limitations possessed educational credentials that surpassed his own. I dismissed her concerns," he admitted quietly. "I told her that maintenance workers weren't qualified to assess security threats. I said she probably couldn't read medical terminology." The agent's expression remained professional, but his next question cut deep. "Doctor, you're aware that Colonel Wells completed advanced medical training as part of her pilot certification? She's qualified in battlefield medicine, trauma response, and emergency medical procedures under combat conditions." The revelation was devastating. Lawson had condescendingly explained medical concepts to someone whose emergency medical training exceeded his own experience with crisis situations. Nurse Melissa Turner found herself facing similar reckonings. FBI agents were interviewing all hospital staff to document the timeline of warnings and responses, and Turner's dismissive comments were being recorded as part of the official investigation. "Ma'am, can you explain why you felt maintenance staff shouldn't have access to restricted areas of the hospital?" Agent Morrison asked, reviewing his notes. We thought she was just a cleaning lady," Turner stammered. She was dressed like maintenance staff, pushing a cart, emptying trash. We had no idea she was qualified for anything else. According to Colonel Wells' service record, she held top-secret security clearances for 6 years and was responsible for protecting classified military installations. Her background checks were more thorough than standard hospital employment screening. Turner's earlier comments about people like that and intellectual competence now seemed not just wrong, but grotesquely inappropriate. She had questioned the qualifications of someone whose security clearance had required investigations by federal agencies. Security Chief Frank Hudson faced the most professional humiliation. His radio crackled with incoming communications from federal agencies requesting briefings about the hospital's security protocols and his assessment of the tactical threat. "Chief Hudson," Agent Morrison said formally, "we need to understand how a decorated military officer's warnings about imminent assault were disregarded by security personnel." Hudson's hands trembled as he reviewed his incident reports from the night. Every entry documented his dismissal of Samantha's concerns, his refusal to investigate her observations, and his characterization of her warnings as paranoid fantasies from civilian workers. "Sir, I had no idea about her military background," Hudson said defensively. "Her personnel file listed her as maintenance staff. There was nothing indicating military service or tactical training." Chief Colonel Wells indicated that she provided specific details about tactical vehicle positioning, personnel counts, and operational patterns. "Did you investigate any of these claims?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Hudson had not only failed to investigate legitimate security threats, he had actively prevented the most qualified person in the building from responding to those threats. Hospital Administrator Joan Mitchell faced consequences that extended far beyond personal embarrassment. The hospital's board of directors had convened an emergency session to review the events, and Mitchell found herself explaining how she had fired the only person capable of preventing a catastrophe. "Board members," she addressed the somber gathering, "I take full responsibility for the personnel decisions that compromised our security response. However, I want to emphasize that Colonel Wells' military background was not disclosed in her employment application." Board Chairman Robert Sterling reviewed the incident timeline with obvious concern. "Joan, according to the FBI report, Colonel Wells made specific attempts to warn you about tactical threats. How did you respond to these warnings?" Mitchell's face flushed with shame as she recalled her dismissive treatment of someone she had perceived as a mental health crisis. I ordered her removal from the facility. I terminated her employment and instructed security to escort her out. You fired a decorated combat veteran for accurately identifying a military assault on our facility." The question exposed the full magnitude of Mitchell's misjudgment. She had not only ignored expert warnings about an imminent crisis, she had actively removed the most qualified responder from the building. Dr. Nicole Bryant stood outside the emergency department, reviewing her own comments from the night with growing horror. A colleague approached her with a tablet displaying news coverage of the incident. "Nicole, look at this," Dr. Pierce said quietly, showing her a news article titled, "Decorated Fighter Pilot Prevents Hospital Attack While Working as Janitor." Bryant read the article with increasing dismay. Colonel Samantha Phoenix Wells had flown 127 combat missions, coordinated close air support that saved dozens of ground units, and received commendations for tactical excellence under enemy fire. The woman Bryant had dismissed as intellectually inferior was a military hero, whose decorations indicated extraordinary competence under the most dangerous conditions. "I told her she probably couldn't read medical terminology," Bryant whispered. "I said people like her were a liability in medical facilities." "Nicole," Pierce replied soberly, "according to this article, she completed advanced medical training that included battlefield surgery, trauma response, and emergency medicine under combat conditions. Her medical qualifications were probably superior to ours in crisis situations. The irony was crushing. Medical professionals had dismissed someone whose emergency medical training had been tested under conditions they could never imagine. Nurse Tracy Coleman discovered her own comments being replayed on local news coverage of the incident. A reporter had obtained cell phone video from the night, including audio of Coleman's dismissive remarks about Samantha's intellectual capabilities. "We have confirmation that the hero of last night's incident is Colonel Samantha Wells, a decorated Air Force pilot who prevented what could have been a devastating attack on Cedar Ridge Medical Center," the news anchor reported. Remarkably, hospital staff initially dismissed Colonel Wells as an unqualified maintenance worker, despite her extensive military background and tactical expertise. Coleman watched in horror as her own voice played back. "Half of them, probably, can't even read the warning labels on the chemicals they're using." The reporter continued, "Colonel Wells holds advanced degrees from the Air Force Academy and has completed graduate studies in aerospace engineering, military strategy, and advanced medical procedures. Her educational background includes qualifications that exceed those of many medical professionals." Detective Alex Murphy, whose casual dismissal of Samantha's warnings had been documented in police reports, now found himself explaining his assessment to federal investigators. "Detective," Agent Morrison asked formally, "when Colonel Wells reported tactical vehicle positioning and potential assault preparations, what was your evaluation of her credibility?" Murphy's earlier condescension now seemed professionally incompetent. I assumed she was a civilian with no training in threat assessment. I dismissed her concerns as paranoid observations from someone who watched too many action movies." "Detective, were you aware that Colonel Wells' military training included advanced instruction in asymmetric warfare, terrorist operations, and tactical threat identification?" The question exposed a fundamental flaw in Murphy's response. He had dismissed expert warnings from someone whose training in threat assessment exceeded his own law enforcement experience. As the sun rose over Cedar Ridge Medical Center, a clear pattern emerged from the federal investigation. Every person in authority had made the same catastrophic error. They had judged competence by appearance, dismissed expertise based on job titles, and ignored warnings from the most qualified person in the building, the woman they had all treated as intellectually inferior was revealed to be more educated, more experienced, and more qualified than any of them had imagined. Their prejudices had nearly cost lives, and only Samantha's determination to protect innocent people had prevented a tragedy that would have made national headlines for all the wrong reasons. Within 48 hours of the incident, Cedar Ridge Medical Center became the epicenter of a transformation that would reshape hospital policies nationwide. Federal investigators had documented every dismissive comment, every ignored warning, and every missed opportunity to prevent the crisis. The pattern of institutional failure was so comprehensive that it demanded systematic change. Board Chairman Robert Sterling convened an emergency meeting that would be remembered as a watershed moment in hospital administration. The conference room was packed with board members, department heads, and federal representatives who had compiled a devastating assessment of the facility's cultural failures. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelations, "we are here because we nearly lost everything due to our inability to recognize competence when it didn't match our preconceptions. Colonel Wells saved this institution despite our systematic efforts to silence her." Dr. Lawson sat in stunned silence as Sterling read excerpts from the federal report. Every condescending comment, every dismissive gesture, and every assumption about intellectual capability had been documented with clinical precision. "Dr. Lawson," Sterling continued, "you told a decorated combat veteran that she probably didn't finish high school and lectured her about medical terminology. The woman you dismissed as intellectually inferior holds advanced degrees that surpass your own educational credentials." The humiliation was complete, but Sterling wasn't finished. Nurse Turner, you questioned whether maintenance staff could read warning labels on chemicals. Apparently unaware that you were speaking to someone with top-secret security clearances, who had been responsible for handling classified materials for 6 years. Hospital Administrator Mitchell found herself facing the board's most serious questions about leadership and judgment. Her decision to fire Samantha for making paranoid claims had nearly resulted in catastrophic consequences. "Joan," Sterling said solemnly, "you terminated the employment of the most qualified security expert in the building. Your personnel decisions could have cost hundreds of lives." But the board's response went beyond individual accountability. Sterling announced comprehensive policy changes that would transform how the hospital evaluated and responded to all personnel, regardless of their apparent position in the institutional hierarchy. Effective immediately, Cedar Ridge Medical Center is implementing the Wells Protocol, he announced, using a name that would become synonymous with institutional reform across the healthcare industry. The Wells Protocol established revolutionary policies that mandated respect for all personnel observations, created anonymous reporting systems for security concerns, and required background verification for all staff recommendations, regardless of their apparent job function. But more significantly, the protocol addressed the cultural attitudes that had nearly led to disaster. Mandatory training sessions would educate all staff about unconscious bias, the danger of dismissing expertise based on appearance, and the critical importance of taking seriously any legitimate safety concern. News of the incident spread throughout the medical community with shocking speed. Hospital administrators across the country studied the Cedar Ridge case as a cautionary tale about institutional prejudice and missed opportunities for crisis prevention. Dr. Margaret Thompson, chief of staff at Metro General Hospital, reviewed the incident report with her own administrative team. "This could have happened at any medical facility," she told her colleagues. "We all have blind spots about recognizing competence in unexpected places." Metro General immediately implemented their own version of the Wells Protocol, recognizing that similar cultural failures could exist in their institution. The incident had exposed systemic problems that extended far beyond a single hospital. Meanwhile, Samantha found herself at the center of national attention that she had never sought. News outlets across the country covered the story of the decorated fighter pilot who had prevented a hospital attack while working as a janitor. The Today Show invited her for an interview that would reach millions of viewers. The host, clearly moved by the story, asked the question that had captivated the public imagination. "Colonel Wells, how did it feel to have your warnings dismissed by people who later discovered you were more qualified than they realized?" Samantha's response demonstrated the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her military service. The important thing was preventing harm to innocent people. Personal recognition was never the objective. But her next comments addressed the broader implications that had transformed her story into a national conversation about workplace respect and hidden expertise. "Everyone has value, regardless of their job title or appearance," she said simply. "The maintenance worker, the janitor, the person emptying trash cans, any of them might have crucial information that could save lives. The key is creating environments where people feel safe speaking up and where their concerns are taken seriously." The interview sparked nationwide discussions about workplace hierarchy, unconscious bias, and the danger of dismissing people based on superficial judgments. Human resources departments across the country began reviewing their own policies for identifying and utilizing hidden expertise among their personnel. Several major corporations announced initiatives inspired by the Wells Protocol. Amazon, Microsoft, and General Electric all implemented programs designed to identify and leverage unexpected competence within their workforce. But the most significant transformation occurred within the healthcare industry itself. The Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare, Organizations announced new standards requiring all medical facilities to implement policies similar to the Wells Protocol. Dr. Sarah Chun, speaking for the Commission, explained the rationale. The Cedar Ridge incident demonstrated that life-saving expertise can exist anywhere within a healthcare facility. Our new standards require institutions to create systems that identify and respect competence regardless of job titles or hierarchical positions. Back at Cedar Ridge Medical Center, the changes were both immediate and profound. The hospital established the Colonel Samantha Wells Center for Security Excellence, dedicated to training healthcare personnel in threat recognition and crisis response. But more importantly, the cultural transformation was evident in daily operations. Maintenance staff reported that medical personnel now engaged with them respectfully, asking for their observations about facility operations and security concerns. Luis Rodriguez, a maintenance technician who had witnessed Samantha's treatment during the crisis, noticed the dramatic shift in workplace culture. "Before, doctors and nurses barely acknowledged us," he explained to a reporter. "Now they ask for our input, treat us like professionals, and actually listen when we have concerns." The hospital also established an anonymous reporting system that allowed any employee to flag security concerns or operational problems without fear of dismissal or retaliation. The system was specifically designed to prevent the kind of institutional blindness that had nearly led to catastrophe. Security Chief Hudson, who had retained his position despite his failures during the crisis, underwent extensive retraining in threat assessment and personnel management. His new protocols required investigation of all security concerns, regardless of their source. "I learned that expertise doesn't announce itself," Hudson admitted during a staff training session. "Some of the most qualified people in the building might be the ones we least expect to have critical knowledge." The federal investigation had concluded with recommendations that influenced policy at the highest levels of government. The Department of Homeland Security issued guidelines for healthcare facility security that specifically addressed the importance of recognizing and utilizing unexpected expertise during crisis situations. But perhaps the most lasting change was cultural. The phrase "pulling a Cedar Ridge" entered common usage in healthcare circles, referring to the dangerous practice of dismissing valuable input based on superficial judgments about competence. As the hospital settled into its new operational reality, staff members frequently reflected on the night when their assumptions had nearly cost everything. The woman they had dismissed as just a janitor had not only saved their lives, but had also transformed their understanding of respect, competence, and the hidden potential that exists in every workplace. The transformation was complete, but the lessons would resonate for generations of healthcare professionals who would learn that heroes don't always wear the uniforms you expect, and that the most important voice in the room might belong to the person everyone assumes is least qualified to speak. 6 months after the incident that shocked the healthcare industry, Samantha Phoenix Wells stood before a packed auditorium at the National Healthcare Security Conference. The audience consisted of hospital administrators, security professionals, and medical personnel from across the country, many of whom had implemented their own versions of the Wells Protocol. But Samantha's presence at the conference represented more than recognition for her heroic actions. She had become a symbol of hidden potential, unexpected expertise, and the critical importance of creating inclusive environments where every voice could be heard. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conference moderator announced, "please welcome Colonel Samantha Wells, whose actions at Cedar Ridge Medical Center have transformed how our industry approaches security, personnel evaluation, and workplace respect." The standing ovation lasted several minutes, but Samantha's expression remained characteristically humble. When she spoke, her words carried the same quiet authority that had once commanded fighter squadrons and coordinated life-saving tactical operations. "I didn't prevent a tragedy that night by revealing my military background," she began, her voice reaching every corner of the auditorium. I prevented it by doing what anyone with relevant training should do when they recognize a threat to innocent people. The real tragedy would have been if institutional prejudice had prevented that response. Her speech addressed the fundamental issues that the Cedar Ridge incident had exposed throughout American healthcare. Every day, in hospitals across this country, there are maintenance workers, custodians, security guards, and support staff who possess knowledge, experience, and expertise that could save lives. But only if we create environments where their voices are valued. The audience listened with rapt attention as she continued. I was fortunate to have military training that enabled me to recognize and respond to a tactical threat. But I wasn't the only person in that hospital with valuable expertise. The maintenance supervisor knew building systems better than anyone. The night security guards understood normal traffic patterns and could have identified anomalies. The custodial staff had access to areas and information that medical personnel never see. Her words resonated because they addressed a truth that extended far beyond healthcare. Competence exists in unexpected places, and organizational success depends on recognizing and utilizing that competence, regardless of job titles or hierarchical positions. Dr. Margaret Thompson, who had implemented sweeping changes at Metro General Hospital following the Cedar Ridge incident, stood to address the audience. Colonel Wells' story forced us to examine our own institutional blind spots. We discovered that we had been overlooking valuable expertise from our own support staff for years. Thompson shared examples of how her hospital's new protocols had already prevented potential crises. A custodian noticed unusual activity in our Perkin garage that security cameras had missed. A maintenance worker identified structural vulnerabilities that could have compromised patient safety. These observations were only valuable because we created systems that encouraged reporting and took all concerns seriously. The conference featured numerous case studies of healthcare facilities that had successfully implemented inclusive security protocols. The results were consistently positive: improved threat detection, enhanced operational security, and significantly better workplace culture. But the impact of Samantha's story extended far beyond hospital security. Major corporations had begun implementing Wells protocols designed to identify and leverage hidden expertise within their workforce. General Electric's chief human resources officer presented data showing that their Wells-inspired program had identified over 200 employees with advanced skills and qualifications that had been unknown to management. We discovered former military personnel, retired engineers, and subject matter experts throughout our organization, she explained. These people had valuable knowledge that we were completely failing to utilize. Amazon announced similar results. From their program, which had identified hidden expertise in areas ranging from logistics and supply chain management to cybersecurity and crisis response. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was cultural. The phrase "listening like Wells" had entered common usage in progressive organizations, referring to the practice of actively seeking input from unexpected sources and treating all personnel observations as potentially valuable. Back at Cedar Ridge Medical Center, the transformation continued to evolve. The hospital had established the Wells Fellowship Program, which provided educational opportunities for support staff who demonstrated exceptional competence or potential. Luis Rodriguez, the maintenance technician who had witnessed Samantha's treatment during the crisis, became the program's first participant. The hospital sponsored his completion of an engineering degree, recognizing that his practical knowledge of building systems combined with formal education could benefit the entire facility. 6 months ago, doctors wouldn't even make eye contact with me, Rodriguez reflected. Now I'm part of a safety committee that reviews all facility operations. Colonel Wells didn't just save our lives that night. She showed us that everyone has something valuable to contribute. Nurse Tracy Coleman, who had made some of the most dismissive comments during the crisis, underwent a personal transformation that exemplified the broader cultural change. She voluntarily enrolled in diversity and inclusion training and eventually became an advocate for workplace respect and inclusive communication. "I'm ashamed of how I treated Colonel Wells," Coleman admitted during a staff meeting. "But I'm grateful that her example taught me to recognize competence wherever it exists. I've learned more about healthcare from our custodial and maintenance staff than I ever expected." Security Chief Hudson, who had retained his position despite his failures during the crisis, became a national speaker on the topic of inclusive security protocols. His presentations focused on the dangerous consequences of dismissing security concerns based on their source rather than their content. "I nearly cost lives because I couldn't see past job titles and appearances," Hudson told audiences across the country. "Colonel Wells taught me that expertise doesn't announce itself, and that the most critical information might come from the most unexpected sources." The federal government had taken notice of the systemic changes inspired by the Cedar Ridge incident. The Department of Homeland Security established the Wells Initiative, a program designed to help organizations identify and utilize hidden expertise for security and crisis response purposes. Dr. Nicole Bryant, whose comments about intellectual competence had been among the most condescending during the crisis, found herself leading her hospital's implementation of the new federal guidelines. "The Wells Initiative requires us to actively seek expertise from all personnel levels," Bryant explained to her colleagues. "We can no longer afford to assume that job titles reflect capabilities or that hierarchical positions indicate competence." As Samantha concluded her conference presentation, she returned to the fundamental message that had driven her actions throughout the crisis. Respect isn't earned through titles or credentials. It's the basic recognition that every person has dignity and potential value. When we create environments where people feel safe to speak up and confident that their concerns will be taken seriously, we create safer, stronger, and more effective organizations. The audience rose in another standing ovation, but Samantha's final words carried the quiet wisdom that had characterized her throughout the ordeal. "I wasn't a hero that night. I was just someone who refused to let prejudice prevent me from protecting innocent people. Anyone in that hospital could have done the same thing if they had been listened to, respected, and empowered to act." As the conference concluded and participants returned to their home institutions, they carried with them a transformed understanding of leadership, expertise, and the hidden potential that exists in every workplace. The woman they had once dismissed as just a janitor had not only saved lives, she had sparked a revolution in how organizations recognize, respect, and utilize the talents of every person, regardless of their position on the organizational chart. Months later, in hospitals, corporations, and institutions across America, the lesson continued to resonate. Heroes don't always announce themselves. Competence doesn't always wear expected uniforms. And the most important voice in any crisis might belong to the person everyone assumes is least qualified to speak. The legacy of that night at Cedar Ridge Medical Center would endure as a reminder that in a world quick to judge by appearances, the greatest expertise often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone wise enough to listen. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.